Ezio followed Yusuf's lead, managing as he somersaulted over his man to grab him by the neck and wrestle him to the ground, landed some feet behind him, and ran on to join his companion. But there were more guards ahead to deal with, and in doing so, Ezio picked up another technique from his Seljuk friend. This time Yusuf swung the hook low, stooping as he approached his target, and wrapped his weapon round one of his opponent's ankles, felling him as he swept past. Once again, Ezio copied the moves and had soon caught up with the leader of the Istanbul assassins. "And that's what we call a hook and run," Yusuf grinned. "But I can see you're a natural. Excellent work." "I almost stumbled back there. Need to improve." "You'll get plenty of practice." "Look out, here comes more of them." They were at the intersection of 4 streets, empty now that the fighting had caused the ordinary citizens to flee inside the buildings and shut the doors behind them. But they were cornered. Large units of Byzantines were thundering toward them from each quarter. "What now?" said Ezio, drawing his sword and releasing his left-hand hidden blade. "Put those away, Mentor. When he tires of running, an assassin around here takes to the air." Ezio quickly followed Yusuf as he scaled the nearest wall, using his hook to aid him with increasing skill. Once on the rooftops again, Ezio noticed that in this area many were topped with stout, vertical wooden posts, from which tarred ropes, stretched taut, led upward and downward to other posts on other rooftops, connected by a series of pulleys and blocks and tackle. Such a post stood on their roof next to where they were standing. "We introduced this system to transport goods about, from warehouse to warehouse, from warehouse to shop," explained Yusuf. "You can find it in various districts all over the city. It's a lot quicker than using the streets, which are too narrow and usually crowded, and it's a lot quicker for us, too." Ezio looked down below, to where the Byzantines were trying to break into the building which they were standing on. Too heavily armored to climb, they'd decided to come at them from the interior. "We'd better hurry." "You use your hook blade for this, too," said Yusuf. "Just hook it to a rope, hang on tight, and let go. Of course it only works downhill." "I'm beginning to see why you developed this weapon. It's perfect for Constantinople." "You can say that again." Yusuf cast a glance down to the street below in his turn. "But you're right, we must make haste." Briefly, he scanned the surrounding rooftops. About 300 feet away, on the roof of a building downhill from where they were, he spotted a Byzantine scout, his back to them, keeping a lookout over the city which spread itself below him. "See that guy?" Yusuf said. "Yes." "And there's another just over there to the left, on a connecting roof." "Got him." "We're going to take them out." Yusuf extended his hook blade and notched it over the rope. He raised a warning hand as Ezio was about to do the same. "Do not follow me immediately. Allow me to show you." "I am glad to learn the customs of the country." "We call this a zip line. Watch." Yusuf waited until the second scout was looking in another direction, then let the rope take his weight. It strained slightly, but held. Then he swung his body clear, and in a moment he was sailing silently down the rope toward the unsuspecting first scout. At the last moment he unhooked his blade and dropped the last few feet onto his target, swinging the blade round to slice into the man's side. He caught the scout's falling body and lowered it gently to the ground, before stepping quickly behind the cover of a small outbuilding on the roof. From there he let out a strangled cry. This alerted the second scout, who turned quickly to look in the direction from which the sound had come. "Help, comrade! Assassins!" Yusuf called, using Greek in an anguished voice. "Stand fast, I'm coming!" the second scout called back, racing across the roof to the aid of his fellow. At that moment Yusuf beckoned to Ezio, who rocketed down the rope in his turn, in time to drop fatally onto the second scout, by that time kneeling next to the body of his fallen companion. Yusuf joined him by the 2 bodies. "You didn't even break a sweat," Yusuf said, chuckling. Then he immediately became serious and continued, "I can see you can look after yourself, so I think it's time we split up. I'd better head to the bazaar and see what's happening at our den there. You go on to Galata, to help them there." "Tell me the way." Yusuf pointed across the rooftops. "You see the tower?" "Yes." "The den's right by it. I can't be in two places at once, but now you're here I don't have to be. Thank Allah you came, Mentor. Without your help—" "You've done all right so far." Yusuf took his hand. "Heidi rastkele, Ezio. Good luck." "Good luck to you, too." Yusuf turned south while Ezio ran over the russet-coloured tiles of the rooftops until he found another rope system. Sailing quickly and unopposed from holding post to holding post and travelling a lot faster than he would have done on foot, he quickly made his way downward toward the tower's base and his next battle. 22. Ezio arrived during a lull in the fighting and managed to slip into the den without being seen. There, he was greeted by Dogan, one of the assassin lieutenants he had briefly met earlier. "Mentor, it is an honor. Is Yusuf not with you?" "No, they've mounted another attack on our den by the Grand Bazaar. He's on his way there now." Ezio paused. "What is the situation here?" Dogan wiped his brow. "We've beaten back the vanguard, but they're just fallen back to wait for reinforcements." "Are your men ready for them?" Dogan gave Ezio a wry smile, encouraged by the Mentor's enthusiasm and confidence. "Now you're here, they are." "Where's the next attack likely to come from?" "The north side. They think that's the weakest." "Then we'd better make sure it's the strongest." Dogan redeployed his assassins according to Ezio's instructions, and by the time the Templars launched their counterattack, they were ready for them. The fight was as fierce as it was short, leaving 15 Templar mercenaries dead in the square near the tower where the den was located. The assassin troop counted 2 men and 1 woman wounded, but no fatalities. It had been a rout of the Templars. "They will not be back soon," Dogan told Ezio when it was all over. "Let's hope so. From my experience of the Templars, they do not like to be bested." "Well, if they try it again around here, they'll have to learn to live with it." Ezio smiled and clapped Dogan on the shoulder. "That's the kind of talk I like to hear." He made to take his leave. "Where will you go now?" asked Dogan. "I'm going to join Yusuf at the den of the Grand Bazaar. Send word to me there if the Templars do regroup." "In that unlikely event, you will be the first to know." "And tend to your wounded. That sergeant of yours took a bad cut to the head." "It is being attended to as we speak." "Can I get there by using the zip-line system?" "Once you reach the south bank of the Horn, but you must cross that by ferry. It's the fastest way to the peninsula." "Ferry?" "There was to have been a bridge, but for some reason it was never built." "Ah, yes," said Ezio. "I remember somebody mentioning that." He put out his hand. "Allah is Maladik," he said. "Gule gule," Dogan smiled back. The den Ezio needed to reach was located not far from the bazaar in the Imperial District, between the bazaar itself and the ancient church of Hagia Sophia, now converted by the Ottomans into a mosque. But the fighting Ezio reached was taking place a short distance to the southwest, close to the docks on the southern shores of the city. He stood for a moment on a rooftop, observing the battle, which was in full spate in the streets and on the quays below him. A rope from a wooden stake near him stretched down to a point near where he could see Yusuf, his back to the waters of the dock in the thick of the fray. Yusuf was fending off a half-dozen burly mercenaries, and his companions were too busy themselves to come to his aid. Ezio hooked onto the rope and swooped down, jumping from the rope at a height of 12 feet and spread-eagling himself, left hand hidden blade extended, to land on the backs of 2 of Yusuf's attackers, sending them sprawling. They were dead before they could react, and Ezio stood over them as the remaining 4 in their group turned to face him, giving Yusuf enough time to edge round to their flank. Ezio kept his hook blade extended. As the 4 Templar troopers fell roaring on Ezio, Yusuf rushed them from the side, his own hidden blade brought quickly into play. One huge soldier was almost upon Ezio, having backed him up against a warehouse wall, when he remembered the hook-and-roll technique and used it to escape from and fell his opponent, stabbing the man's writhing body with his hidden blade to deliver the coup de grace. Meanwhile, Yusuf had dispatched 2 of the others, while the survivor took to his heels. Elsewhere, fierce fighting was simmering down as Yusuf's brigade got the better of the Templars, who finally fled, cursing, into the depths of the city to the north. "Glad you arrived in time to meet my new playmates," said Yusuf, wiping and sheathing his sword, and retracting his hidden blade, as Ezio did likewise. "You fought like a tiger, my friend, like a man late for his own wedding." "Do you not mean funeral?" "You would not mind being late for that?" "Well, if we're talking about a wedding, I'm 25 years late already." Ezio pushed the familiar darkening mood aside and squared his shoulders. "Did I arrive in time to save the bazaar den?" Yusuf shrugged regretfully. "Alas, no. We've only managed to save our own skins. The bazaar den is taken. Unfortunately, I arrived too late to regain it. They were too well entrenched." "Don't despair. The Galata den is safe. The assassins we used there can join us here." Yusuf brightened. "With my army doubled in size, we'll take the bazaar back together. Come, this way." 23. They made their way through the market streets and the massive, glittering maze of the souk itself, the splendid, frenetic, gold-and-red Grand Bazaar, with its myriad lanes of little shops selling everything from scents to spices to sheepskins to costly Persian carpets from Isfahan and Kabul, cedarwood furniture, sword and armor, brass and silver coffee pots with snaking spouts and elongated necks, tulip-shaped glasses for tea and larger, slender ones for Shabbat, a cornucopia selling everything in the world a man could imagine or desire, amid a babble of traders' voices raised in at least a dozen different languages. Once they'd passed out of the northeastern side, they came to streets nearer the den. Here the Templar presence was strong. The buildings were hung with their banners, and the merchants who did business there, Ezio could see, were not infrequently being harassed or otherwise bullied by Byzantine toughs. "As you can see," Yusuf was telling him, "when the Templars take over a district, they like to flaunt it. It's a constant battle to keep them at bay. They like nothing better than to rub our noses in every victory they enjoy." "But why does the Sultan do nothing? This is his city." "Sultan Bayezid is far away. There aren't enough Ottoman resources for the governor here to keep matters in check. If it weren't for us—" Yusuf trailed off, then continued, following another train of thought. "The Sultan is at war with his son, Selim, many leagues northwest of the city. He's been away for years, at least since the great earthquake in 1509, and even before that he was almost always absent. He is blind to all this turmoil." The earthquake? Ezio remembered news of that reaching Rome. Over 100 mosques had been reduced to rubble, along with 1,000 other buildings, and 10,000 citizens had lost their lives. "You should have seen it. We called it the Lesser Day of Judgment. The huge waves it caused in the Sea of Marmara almost brought down the southern walls, but the Sultan's eyes remained closed, even to that warning." "Ah, but your eyes are open, see?" "Like 2 full moons, believe me." They had reached a large open carresi, thronged with Templar mercenaries, who began to eye them suspiciously as they crossed the square. "Too many to engage directly," Yusuf said. "We'd better use one of these." He delved into the pouch at his side and produced a bomb. "What's that, a smoke bomb?" Ezio said. I'm not confident that will help us here." Yusuf laughed. "Smoke bomb? Dear Ezio, mentor, it's really high time you Italians joined the 16th century. These bombs do not obscure, they distract. Watch." Ezio stood back as Yusuf threw the bomb some distance away from him. It exploded harmlessly, but sent a shower of small, apparently gold coins into the air, which rained down over the mercenaries. Their attention was immediately distracted from Ezio and Yusuf as they hurried to pick up the coins, shouldering aside the civilians around, who tried to join in. "What was that?" asked Ezio in astonishment, as they continued on their way, now in no fear of molestation. Yusuf smiled craftily. "That's what we call a gold bomb. It's filled with coins made of pyrite. They look exactly like gold coins, but are very cheap to produce." Ezio watched the troopers scatter, oblivious to anything but the fool's gold. "You see," said Yusuf, "they can't resist. But let's get a move on before they've picked them all up." "You are full of surprises today." "Crafting explosives is a new hobby of ours, one we've borrowed from the Chinese. We've taken to it with great passion. I'm obviously getting rusty, but a friend of mine once made me some bombs in Spain, long ago, so I know something of the subject. You'll have to teach me the new techniques." "Gladly, but who is the mentor here, Ezio? I'm beginning to wonder." "That's enough of your cheek, assassin," Ezio grinned, clapping Yusuf on the shoulder. A narrow street they'd been passing along gave way to another square, and there, again, in that Templar-infested district, was another large group of Byzantine mercenaries. They'd heard the commotion from the adjoining Carresi and were looking restive. Yusuf drew a handful of small bombs from his pouch and handed them to Ezio. "Your turn," he said. "Make me proud." "The wind's behind us, so we should be all right." The Byzantines were already making for the two assassins and drawing their swords. Ezio pulled the pins of the 3 bombs in his hand and threw them toward the oncoming mercenaries. They exploded on impact with the ground with little harmless-sounding pops, and for a moment it looked as if nothing else had happened. But then the Templar troops hesitated and looked at each other, gagging and dabbing at their uniforms, which were covered with a stinking, viscous liquid. Quickly, they beat a retreat. "There they go," said Yusuf. "It'll be days before their women will take them back into their beds." "Another of your surprises?" "Those were skunk oil bombs, very effective if you judge your moment and keep out of the prevailing wind." "Thanks for the warning." "What warning?" "Exactly." "Hurry, we're nearly there." They'd crossed the Carresi into another street, broader this time, but lined with what looked like boarded-up shops. Yusuf paused at one of them and pushed cautiously at its door, which swung open. Beyond it was a small, plain courtyard, a few barrels and packing cases stacked up along the far wall. In the middle was an open trapdoor, with stone steps leading down from it. A tower rose from the rear left-hand corner of the courtyard. "As I thought," said Yusuf. He turned to Ezio and spoke urgently. "This is one of our underground dens. It looks deserted, I know, but below the Templars will have it well guarded. Among their rabble there's a Templar captain. May I ask you to find him and kill him?" "I'll get your hideout back for you." "Good. When you've done so, climb that tower and set off the signal flare you'll find there. It's another one of our bombs, and it's a copy of the flares the Templars use to signal a retreat." "And you?" "It won't take those Templars in the square long to realize what's happened, so I'll go back and find a way of stopping them from following us here and trying to reinforce their friends. I've got a couple of phosphorus bombs clipped to my tunic belt. They should do the trick." "So you do still use old-fashioned smoke screens?" Yusuf nodded. "Yes, but these are pretty nasty, so—" He drew a scarf over his nose and mouth. "And before I go, there's one more little trick up my sleeve, which should bring the rabbits out of their hole. I wouldn't want you to go down to the den and fight those thugs in semi-darkness. Once they've surfaced, you should be able to pick them off without too much trouble." From his pouch he produced a final bomb and hefted it for a moment. "I'll set this off now, then be on my way. We've got to neutralize both groups of Templars simultaneously, or we'll be lost. Just cover your ears. This is a cherry bomb, and it's packed with sulfur, so it'll make a noise like a thunderclap. It'll bring them up all right, but I don't want you to burst your eardrums." Ezio did as he was bidden, moving back to a strategic position on the shady side of the courtyard with a good view of the trapdoor. He exchanged his left-hand hidden blade for his adapted pistol harness, preferring to retain the hook blade for close combat. Yusuf, near the street, threw his cherry bomb to the far side of the courtyard and disappeared. There was a noise as loud as the devil's fart, and Ezio, though he'd covered his ears beneath his hood firmly, still had the aftershock in his head. He shook it to clear it, and as he did so, 10 Templars, led by a ruddy-nosed captain, burst from the trap-door into the sunlight, looking around them in panic. Ezio moved in swiftly and had cut 3 down before they'd had time to react. Using his hook blade, he was able to kill another 3 in the next minute of combat. 3 more ran off as they heard the sound of 2 more explosions, followed shortly afterward by the faint smell of smoke in the breeze. "Perfect timing, Yusuf," murmured Ezio to himself. The captain of the cohort stood and confronted Ezio, a brawny, wall-eyed man with well-used black shoulder armor over his dark red tunic. He held a heavy Damascus in his right hand and a wicked-looking curved dagger with a barbed point in his left.
"Rip and slit," said the captain in a hoarse voice. "I hook you in with the dagger and slit your throat with the sword. You're as good as dead, assassin."
"It's really high time you Templars joined the 16th century," replied Ezio, raising his left arm and springing his pistol into his hand. He fired, thinking that at that range he really couldn't miss, even left-handed, and sure enough, the ball sank into the bone, straight between the captain's eyes. The captain was still sinking to his knees as Ezio sprang across the courtyard, leapt onto one of the barrels for purchase, and used the hook blade to surge to the top of the tower. The flare Yusuf had told him of had not been discovered or disturbed. There was a little mortar, and Ezio loaded the flare into it. A moment later, it streaked high into the sky, trailing a vivid streak of flame and violet smoke. By the time he reached the foot of the tower again, Yusuf was waiting for him.
"No wonder you are our mentor," said the Seljuk assassin. "You could not have timed that better." He beamed in triumph. "The Templars are withdrawing on all fronts."
24. The bazaar den was remarkably neat and tidy, given its recent occupation by the Templars. "Any damage?" Ezio asked Yusuf, as his Turkish comrade stared at the ceiling.
"Not that I can see. Byzantine Templars may be bad hosts, but they are decent tenants. Once they capture a location, they like to keep it intact."
"Because they intend to stay?"
"Exactly." Yusuf rubbed his hands. "We must take advantage of our little victories to prepare you further for the fight against our Greek friends," he said. "I've shown you how to use some of our bombs, but it'll be even better if you know how to make them."
"Is there someone here who can teach me?"
"Of course, the master himself, Piri Reis."
"Piri Reis is one of us?"
"In a manner of speaking. He likes to keep himself aloof, but he's certainly on our side."
"I thought he was more of a map-maker," said Ezio, remembering the map of Cyprus he'd been given by Mamoun.
"Map-maker, seafarer, pirate, though these days he's rising swiftly through the ranks of the Ottoman navy. He's a pretty good all-rounder. And he knows Istanbul, Constantinople, like the back of his hand."
"Good, because there's something I'd like to ask him about the city that he may know, apart from how to make bombs. When can I meet him?"
"No time like the present, and we don't have any to lose. Are you all right after that little skirmish? Need some rest?"
"No."
"Good. I'll take you to him now. His workroom isn't far from here."
Piri Reis, Admiral Piri, had a small set of second-story open-plan rooms on the north side of the Grand Bazaar, whose tall windows threw a cold, clear light on the handful of map tables neatly arranged on the teak floors of a cramped studio. Equally neatly spread out on the tables were maps of a greater number and variety than Ezio had ever seen before, and, seated by them, a handful of assistants were diligently working in silence. The western and southern walls of the workroom were festooned with more maps, all neatly pinned up and squared off to one another. 5 large globes, one in each corner and one in the center of the room, completed the picture. The globes were also works in progress, and freshly inked-in areas showed the latest discoveries added. The western wall was also covered with detailed technical drawings, expertly accomplished, but these were, as Ezio saw at a glance, designs for bombs. He was able to read enough as he passed through the room toward where Piri sat to see that the bomb drawings were divided into categories: lethal, tactical, diversionary, and special casings. An alcove in the wall was big enough to contain a work table, and behind it, arranged with precision, a number of metalworkers' tools were placed on shelves. This was quite a contrast to the chaos in which Leonardo loved to work, Ezio thought, smiling to himself at the memory of his friend. Yusuf and Ezio found Piri himself at work at a large drafting table directly under the windows. 6 or 7 years younger than Ezio, he was a tanned, weather-beaten, healthy and robust figure of a man, wearing a blue silk turban under which a strong face, currently bearing an expression of intense concentration, looked out at the work through piercing, clear, grey eyes. His luxuriant brown beard was neatly trimmed, though worn long, covering the collar of the high-necked, silver-brocade tunic he wore, with baggy blue trousers and plain wooden clogs. He gave Ezio an appraising glance, which Ezio returned, as Yusuf made the introductions.
"What's your name again?" said Piri.
Ezio Auditore da Firenze.
"Ah, yes. I thought for a moment Yusuf said Lothario. Didn't hear the difference."
He looked at Ezio, and Ezio could have sworn there was a twinkle in his eye. Had Ezio's reputation, in one department at least, preceded him? He thought he was going to like this man. "I have seen your work, your maps, anyway," Ezio began. "I had a copy of the one you made for Cyprus."
"Did you?"
replied the sailor gruffly. Clearly he didn't like having his work interrupted, or at least that was the impression he wanted to give. "But it is another aspect of your expertise I have come to seek your advice about today."
"That was a good map, the one of Cyprus," said Piri, ignoring Ezio's remark. "But I've improved it since. Show me yours."
Ezio hesitated. "I don't have it any more," he confessed. "I gave it to a friend of mine."
Piri looked up. "Very generous of you," he said. "Do you know what my maps are worth?"
"Indeed, but I owed that man my life." Ezio hesitated again. "He's a seaman, like yourself."
What's his name? I might have heard of him."
"He's a Mamluk, goes by the name of Al-Scarab."
Piri suddenly beamed. "That old rogue! Well, I hope he puts it to good use. At least he knows better than to try anything on us."
Then he turned his eye on Yusuf.
"Yusuf, what are you doing still standing there? Don't you have anything better to do? Take yourself off and leave your friend with me. I'll see that he has everything he needs. Any friend of Al-Scarab is a friend of mine."
Yusuf grinned and took his leave.
"I knew I'd be leaving you in safe hands," he said as he left.
When they were alone, Piri became more serious.
"I know who you are, Ezio, and I have a pretty good idea why you are here. Will you take some refreshment? There's coffee if you like it."
"I have acquired a taste for it at last."
"Good."
Piri clapped his hands at one of his assistants, who nodded, and went to the back of the workshop to return soon afterward with a brass tray holding a serpentine pot with minute cups and a dish of soft amber-coloured sweetmeats, which Ezio had never tasted before.
"I remember Al-Scarab from my own privateering days," Piri said. "We fought side by side at both battles of Lepanto, a dozen years ago or so, under the flag of my uncle Kemal. No doubt you've heard of him."
"Yes."
"The Spaniards fought us like tigers, but I didn't think so much of the Genoese or the Venetians. You're a Florentine yourself, aren't you?"
"Yes."
"So you're a landlubber."
"My family were bankers."
"On the surface, yes, but something far more noble underneath."
"As you know, banking does not run in my blood as seafaring does in yours."
Piri laughed. "Well said."
He sipped his coffee, wincing as he burned his lips. Then he eased himself off his stool and stretched his shoulders, laying down his pen.
"And that's quite enough small talk. I see you're already looking at the drawings I'm working on. Make any sense of them?"
"I can see they're not maps."
"Is it maps you're after?"
"Yes and no. There is one thing I want to ask you about the city, before I talk about anything else." Piri spread his hands.
"Go ahead."
Ezio took Niccolo Polo's book, The Secret Crusade, out of his side wallet and showed it to Piri.
"Interesting," said the seaman. "Of course, I know all about the Polos. Read Marco's book. Exaggerates a bit, if you ask me."
"I took this from a Templar at Masyaf. Yusuf knows of it and of its contents."
"Masyaf. So, you have been there."
"It mentions the 5 keys to Altaïr's library. From my reading of it, I see that Altaïr entrusted the keys to Niccolo, and that he brought them here and concealed them."
"And the Templars know this? So, it's a race against time."
Ezio nodded. "They've already found one, hidden in the cellars of the Topkapi Palace. I need to recover it and find the other 4.
"So, where will you begin?"
"Do you know the location of the Polo's old trading post here?"
Piri looked at him. "I can tell you exactly where it was. Come over here."
He led the way to where a large, immensely detailed map of Constantinople hung on the wall in a plain gold frame. He peered at it for an instant, then tapped a spot with his index finger.
"It's there, just to the west of Hagia Sophia, no distance from here. Why? Is there a connection?"
"I have a hunch I need to follow."
Piri looked at him. "That is a valuable book," he said slowly.
"Yes, very valuable, if I'm right."
"Well, just make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands."
He was silent for a long moment, thinking.
"Be careful when you find the Polo's old trading post," he said. "You may find more than you bargain for there."
"Does that remark beg a question?"
"If it does, it is a question to which I have no answer. I just ask you to be wary, my friend."
Ezio hesitated before taking Piri further into his confidence. "I think my quest will start in that place. I am sure there must be something hidden there that will give me my first clue."
"It is possible," Piri said, giving nothing away, "but heed my warning."
Then he brightened, rubbing his hands vigorously, as if to chase away demons.
"And now that we've settled that matter, what else can I help you with?"
"I'm sure you've guessed. I am here on an assassin mission, perhaps the most important ever, and Yusuf tells me you would be prepared to show me how to make bombs, the special ones you've developed here."
"Ach, that Yusuf has a big mouth."
But Piri looked serious again.
"I cannot compromise my position, Ezio. I am senior navigator in the Sultan's navy, and this is my current project."
He waved his hands at the maps. Then he winked.
"The bombs are a sideline, but I like to help my true friends in a just cause."
"You may rely on my discretion, as I hope I may on yours."
"Good. Follow me."
So saying, Piri led the way to the spacious alcove on the west wall.
"The bombs are actually part of a naval research project, too," he continued. "Through my soldiering, I have gained an appreciation for artillery and explosives, and that has served the assassins well. It gives us an edge."
He waved his hand at the technical drawings.
"I have developed many kinds of bombs, and some are reserved for the use of your Brotherhood alone. As you can see, they are divided into 4 main categories. Of course, they are expensive, but the Brotherhood has always understood that."
"Yusuf told me the assassins here are short of funds."
"Most good causes usually are," replied Piri, "but Yusuf is also resourceful. I gather you know how to use these weapons."
"I had a crash course."
Piri looked at him levelly. "Good. Well, as Yusuf evidently promised you, if you want to craft your own bombs, I can show you."
He went round the table and picked up 2 pieces of strange-looking metal lying on it. Ezio, leaning forward curiously, reached for a third.
Don't touch that," warned Piri. "One wrong move and bang! The building comes down."
"Are you serious?"
Piri laughed. "The look on your face! Look, I'll show you."
For the next few hours, Piri Reis took Ezio through every basic step involved in constructing each kind of bomb and the materials involved. Ezio learned that each bomb contained the fundamental ingredient of gunpowder, but that not all were designed to be lethal. He'd already had experience of lethal explosives when attacking Cesare Borgia's fleet in Valencia 4 years earlier, and Yusuf had shown him how to use diversionary bombs which created smoke screens, thunderclaps, appalling odors, and apparent pennies from heaven. Piri now demonstrated other applications. Among the bombs with lethal effect were those using coal dust, which added a heavy blasting powder to the gunpowder, and fragmentation bombs whose shrapnel killed messily over a wide range. Bombs containing sachets of lamb's blood splattered their opponents with it, causing them to think they had been wounded and panicking them. Another type of non-lethal explosive, useful in delaying pursuers, was the caltrop bomb, which showered numbers of twisted-together nails in the path of an oncoming enemy. Perhaps the most unpleasant were the bombs that used either datura powder or deadly nightshade. Datura and deadly nightshade are two of what we call the witch's weeds, along with henbane and mandrake, Piri explained, his face grave. I do not like to use them except in cases of great extremity and danger. When exploded in the midst of an enemy, datura causes delirium, deranging the brain, and death. It is perhaps the worst of all. Deadly nightshade produces a poison gas which is equally lethal. The Templars would not hesitate to use them against us if they could. That is one of the moral paradoxes mankind will wrestle with until the day he becomes truly civilized, replied Piri. Is it evil to use evil to combat evil? Is agreeing with that argument merely a simple justification for something none of us should really do? For now, said Ezio, there is not leisure to ponder such questions. You'll find the ingredients for these bombs in locations about the city, which Yusuf will tell you of, said Piri, so keep your eyes open and your nose to the ground as you roam the streets. Ezio rose to take his leave. Piri extended a walnut-brown hand. Come back whenever you need more help. Ezio shook hands, and was unsurprised at the firmness of the grasp. I hope we will meet again. Oh, said Piri with an enigmatic smile, I have no doubt of it. 25. Following Piri Reyes's instructions, Ezio made his way through the bazaar once more, ignoring the insistent blandishments of the traders there, until he reached the quarter west of the enormous bulk of Hagia Sophia. He almost got lost in the labyrinth of streets and alleyways around it, but came at last to the spot which he was sure Piri had indicated on his map. A bookshop, and a Venetian name over the door. He entered, and to his surprise and barely suppressed delight, found himself face to face with the young woman he had encountered on his voyage to Constantinople. She greeted him warmly, but he saw immediately that he was merely being welcomed as a potential customer. There was no sign of recognition on her face. "Buongiorno, mirhaba," she said, switching automatically from Italian to Turkish. "Please, come in." She was busying herself among her stock and, in turning, knocked over a pile of books. Ezio saw at a glance that this shop was the antithesis of Piri Reyes's well-ordered studio. "Ah," said the woman, "excuse the clutter. I have not had time to tidy up since my trip." "You sailed from Rhodes, no?" She looked at him in surprise. "See? How did you know?" "We were on the same ship." He bowed slightly. "My name is Auditore. Ezio." "And I am Sofia Sartor. Have we met?" Ezio smiled. "We have now. May I look around?" "Prego. Most of my best volumes are in the back, by the way." Under the pretext of looking at the books, stacked in apparent chaos on a maze of teetering wooden shelves, Ezio delved deeper into the dark confines of the shop. "It's nice to meet another Italian in this district," Sofia said, following him. "Most of us keep to the Venetian district and Galata." "It's good to meet you, too. But I thought the war between Venice and the Ottoman Empire would have driven most Italians away. After all, it's only 7 or 8 years ago." But Venice kept control of her islands in the White Sea, and everyone came to an arrangement, she replied, at least for the moment.
So you stayed?
She shrugged. I lived here with my parents when I was a girl. True, when the war was on, we were pushed out, but I always knew I would return. She hesitated. Where are you from?
Florence.
Ah.
Is that a problem?
No, I have met some very nice Florentines.
There's no need to sound so surprised.
Forgive me. If you have any questions about the books, just ask.
Grazie.
There's even more stock in the rear courtyard if you're interested. She looked a little rueful. More than I seem to be able to sell, to be honest.
What took you to Rhodes?
The Knights of Rhodes are uneasy. They know the Ottomans haven't given up the idea of taking the island over. They think it's only a question of time. Philippe Villiers de l'Isle-Adam was selling off part of their library. So it was a shopping trip, if you like. Not very successful either. The prices they were asking.
De l'Isle-Adam is a good Grand Master, and a brave man.
Do you know him?
Only by repute.
The woman looked at him as he poked around. Look, nice as it is to chat with you, are you sure I cannot help? You seem a bit lost. Ezio decided to come clean.
I am not really looking to buy anything.
Well, she replied, a touch crisply, I'm not giving anything away free, Mesere.
Forgive me. Just bear with me a little longer. I will make it up to you.
How?
I'm working on that.
Well, I must say— But Ezio silenced her with a gesture. He had manhandled one bookshelf from the back wall of the covered courtyard. The wall was thicker than the others. He could see that, and he'd noticed a crack in it that wasn't a crack at all. It was part of a door frame, artfully concealed.
Dio mio! Exclaimed Sophia. Who put that there?
Has anyone ever moved these bookshelves before?
Never. They've been in place since before my father took over the shop, and before that it had been in disuse for years, decades even.
I see.
Ezio brushed dust and debris accumulated over what looked like far more than decades away from the doorframe, but found no handle or any other means of opening the door. Then he remembered the secret door that led to the vault back in Monteriggioni at his uncle's fortress, and felt around for a hidden catch. Before long, the door swung open and inward. Within, steps the width of the wall led downward into blackness.
"This is incredible," said the woman, peering over Ezio's shoulder.
He smelled the soft scent of her hair, her skin.
"With your permission, I'll find out where it leads to," he said firmly.
"I'll fetch you some light, a candle."
She was back in moments with a candle and a tinderbox.
"Who are you, Mesere?"
she asked, looking into his eyes.
"Only the most interesting man in your life."
She smiled quickly.
"Ah, presuntuoso."
"Stay here. Let no one into the shop. I'll be back before you know it."
Leaving her, he descended the steps, from whose foot a tunnel led deep into the earth. 26. Ezio found himself in a system of underground cisterns. By the feeble light of the candle he could make out barrel-vaulted roofs, supported by row upon row of slender columns, decorated at their capitals with a variety of symbols, among which Ezio recognized eyes. At their bases, some of them, bizarrely, showed the inverted heads of monstrous gorgons. Ezio recognized the place he must be in, the Yerevan Sarniki, the great system of cisterns built below Constantinople. In his book, Niccolo Polo mentioned it. It had been built as a water filtration system by Justinian 1,000 years earlier, but knowing that didn't make it feel any less creepy. He was all but daunted at the vast, cavernous space around him, which he judged, from the echoes the sound his movements made, to be as great as a cathedral. But he remembered that Niccolo had given some indication in the secret crusade of where one key might be found. The directions had been deliberately obscure, but Ezio decided to try to follow them, concentrating as he forced his mind to remember the details. It was hard to make no noise at all, moving through the shallow water that covered the floor of the cistern, but with practice, Ezio managed to reduce this to a minimum. Besides, any sound he made was soon drowned out by the noise of the unsuspecting people he heard up ahead. Evidently he was not alone in his quest, and he reminded himself that, before he got hold of the book, it had been in the Templars' possession. There were lights up ahead as well. Ezio doused his candle and crept forward toward them. Soon he made out the forms of 2 Templar foot soldiers sitting by a small fire in a dark passage. Ezio drew closer. His Greek was good enough to pick up most of what they were saying. The one who was speaking was in a bad mood and not afraid to let it show. Instead, he seemed on the edge of hysteria. "Ti dystechia," he was saying in aggrieved tones. "What misery! Do you know how long we've been searching this filthy cistern?" "I've been here a few weeks," replied his quieter friend. "That's nothing. Try 13 months! Ever since our Grand Master found that damned key." He calmed himself a little. "But he hasn't got a clue what he's doing. All he knows," the soldier's tone became sarcastic, "is that they're somewhere in the city." Hearing this, the other soldier grew more excited himself, sounding overwhelmed at the prospect ahead of them. "This is a very big city." "I know, that's what I said myself," under my breath. They were interrupted by the arrival of a sergeant. "Get on with your work, you bums. You think you're paid to sit around on your asses all day?" Grumbling, the men resumed their task. Ezio shadowed them, hoping to pick up more information. The men were joined by a handful of other soldiers, similarly begrimed and discontented. But Ezio had to watch his step. Tired and disgruntled the soldiers might have been, but they were well trained and vigilant. "Petros," one called to the other, "make sure we have enough torches for the excavation. I'm tired of stumbling around in the dark." Ezio pricked up his ears at the word excavation, but as he moved forward again, his sword scabbard scraped against one of the columns, and the vaulted roofs echoed and amplified the slight sound. The man called Petros darted a look behind him. "There's someone down here with us," he hissed. "Keep your eyes open and your hands steady." The troops were instantly on the alert, urgently calling to one another in muted tones. "Do you see anything?" "Search every corner." Ezio retreated farther into the shadows and waited patiently for the panic to die down. At the same time, he made a mental note to be extra careful in the exaggerated acoustic. Gradually, the guards resumed their search. As he watched, he could see that their actions seemed aimless and that they knew it, but he continued to watch, hoping to detect a pattern, listening to their desultory conversation as he did so. "It stinks down here." "What do you expect? It's a sewer." "I could use a breath of air." "Patience. Shifts up in 3 hours." "Keep it down, you," barked the sergeant, approaching again.